The smell of leather and saddle soap had become as familiar to Eleanor Webb as her own heartbeat, though she had never imagined her life would lead her to a cramped corner in the back of Morrison's General Store in Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, in the summer of 1876. Her fingers moved with practiced precision through the thick cowhide, the needle punching through layers that would have made most men curse and give up. But Eleanor had learned long ago that survival meant mastering whatever skills would keep food on the table and a roof overhead. She was 22 years old, and the calluses on her palms told the story of a woman who had clawed her way through life with nothing but determination and an eye for detail that bordered on obsessive. The saddle she worked on now belonged to a rancher from outside town, a man who had specifically requested her repairs after seeing the work she had done on his foreman's gear. Eleanor had been stitching leather for nearly 4 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a trunk full of his old leatherworking tools. She had taught herself the trade by studying every saddle that came through Morrison's store, by practicing on scraps until her fingers bled, by refusing to accept that a woman could not do what men had always done. Now, men came from 3 counties over to have her work on their saddles, their bridles, their holsters, and gun belts. Her stitching was tighter, her cuts cleaner, her understanding of how leather moved and flexed under stress more intuitive than any leatherworker in Cheyenne. Morrison took 60% of what she earned, and Eleanor worked in a space barely large enough to turn around in, but it was better than the alternatives available to unmarried women in a rough frontier town. She had watched too many women disappear into the saloons and cribs on the south side of town, their faces growing hard and empty as the months passed. Eleanor had promised herself she would never become one of them, no matter how hungry she got, no matter how cold the Wyoming winters became. The bell above the shop door rang, and Eleanor looked up from her work to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun. The man who entered moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, his boots hitting the wooden floor with a steady rhythm. He was broad-shouldered and lean, wearing dusty trail clothes and a hat that had seen better days. His face was tanned from long hours in the sun, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than he frowned. Eleanor guessed he was somewhere in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most. "Help you?" Morrison called from behind the counter, barely glancing up from his ledger. "Heard you have a leatherworker here who can work miracles," the man said, his voice carrying a slight drawl that marked him as coming from further south, maybe Texas or Oklahoma territory. "Got a saddle that needs attention before it falls apart completely." Morrison jerked his thumb toward the back corner. "Eleanor handles the leather work. She's back there." The man turned and his eyes found Eleanor in her cramped workspace. For a moment their gazes locked and Eleanor felt something shift in the air between them, a recognition of something she could not name. She looked away first, focusing on her needle and thread. "Ma'am," the man said, approaching her corner and removing his hat. Up close, she could see his eyes were a warm brown, and there was a kindness in his face that seemed at odds with the rough frontier life. "Name is James Cordell. I run a ranch about 15 miles west of town. This saddle has been with me since Texas, but the stirrup leather is shot and the stitching on the seat is coming apart. Been told you are the best there is." Eleanor set down her work and stood, wiping her hands on her apron. She was tall for a woman, nearly 5'8", but James Cordell still had several inches on her. "Let me see it," she said simply. James returned a few minutes later with the saddle, and Eleanor could tell immediately that it had been a fine piece of work once, probably custom-made in San Antonio or Austin. The leather was high quality, the tooling intricate, but years of hard use had taken their toll. She ran her hands over it, checking the tree beneath, testing the integrity of the horn and cantle. "This is good leather," she said, speaking more to the saddle than to James. "It will take me about a week to do it properly." I will need to replace all the stirrup leathers, restitch the entire seat, and reinforce the rigging. The tree is still solid, which is good. It would be a shame to lose a saddle like this." "Whatever it takes," James said. "I trust your judgment. How much?" Eleanor quoted him a price that was fair but not cheap, expecting him to haggle as most men did. Instead, he simply nodded and pulled out the money, counting it into her hand. His fingers brushed hers briefly, and Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, a reaction that annoyed her. She had no time for such foolishness. "I will have it ready next Tuesday," she said, turning away to set the saddle on her workbench. "I appreciate it, Miss Webb," James said, and something in the way he said her name made her look back at him. He was smiling slightly, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I will be back Tuesday then." After he left, Eleanor found it difficult to concentrate on her work. She told herself it was simply because his saddle was a challenging piece, one that would require all her skill, but she knew she was lying to herself. There had been something in the way James Cordell looked at her, a respect and interest that went beyond the transactional nature of their business. She shook her head, forcing the thoughts away. Men like James Cordell, men with their own ranches and prospects, did not seriously court women who worked in the back corners of general stores with leather stains on their hands. Over the next week, Eleanor poured herself into repairing the saddle. She worked long into the evenings after Morrison closed the shop, using the lamplight to guide her stitches. The leather spoke to her as she worked, telling her where it needed to be reinforced, where it could be left alone. She replaced the stirrup leathers with the finest pieces she had, cut from a hide she had been saving for something special. She restitched the entire seat with a double-row technique that would hold for decades. She cleaned and oiled every inch of the leather until it glowed with renewed life. When Tuesday came, Eleanor found herself watching the door more often than she should, her stomach fluttering with a nervousness she had not felt in years. James arrived in the early afternoon, and when she showed him the finished saddle, his face lit up with genuine delight. "This is better than when I bought it new," he said, running his hands over the leather the same way she had, with appreciation and understanding. "You have real talent, Miss Webb. This is artistry, not just repair work." "It is a good saddle," Eleanor said, uncomfortable with the praise. "It deserved to be treated well." James looked at her for a long moment, and Eleanor had the sense that he was weighing some decision in his mind. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Webb, I wonder if you might allow me to buy you dinner this evening. There is a decent restaurant on 3rd Street, quiet and respectable. I would like to talk to you about a business proposition." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. She did not know this man, and she had learned to be cautious of propositions from strangers. But something in his open, honest expression made her hesitate. "What sort of business proposition?" "One that might benefit us both," James said. "But I would rather discuss it over a proper meal if you are willing. I give you my word as a gentleman that my intentions are honorable." Eleanor considered. Morrison had already left for the day, heading home to his wife and children as he always did by mid-afternoon, leaving her to close up the shop. She had no other obligations, no one waiting for her in the boarding house room she rented. And despite her caution, she found herself curious about what James Cordell might propose. "All right," she said. "I will meet you there at 6 o'clock. The restaurant was indeed quiet and respectable, with checkered tablecloths and proper waitstaff. Eleanor had changed into her best dress, a simple but well-made blue cotton that had belonged to her mother. James stood when she arrived, pulling out her chair with the manners of a man raised properly. They ordered food, and for a few minutes, they made small talk about the weather and the town. Then James set down his fork and looked at her directly. "I will be honest with you, Miss Webb. I have been looking for a good leatherworker to set up a proper saddle shop on my ranch. My operation has grown over the past 2 years. I run about 2,000 head of cattle now, and I employ 15 men full-time. Between my own needs and those of my hands, we go through saddles and tack faster than I can keep up with repairs. I have been sending work out to various shops in town, but the quality is inconsistent and the wait times are long. Eleanor listened, her heart beginning to beat faster as she realized where this might be leading. When I saw your work, James continued, I knew I had found what I was looking for. You have the skill and the eye for quality that is rare, even among men who have been doing this work their whole lives. So here is my proposition. I have an empty building on my ranch, originally built as a bunkhouse, but never used. It is solid, about 20 by 30 feet, with good light and ventilation. I will convert it into a proper leather shop with all the tools and equipment you need. You would work exclusively for me and my outfit, handling all our saddle and tack needs. In exchange, I will pay you a fair wage, provide room and board at the ranch, and the shop would be yours to run as you see fit. Eleanor stared at him, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. Her own shop, fully equipped with steady work and fair pay. It was more than she had ever dreamed possible, but years of hardship had taught her to look for the catch. Why would you do this? She asked bluntly. You could hire any leatherworker in the territory. Why offer this to me? James met her gaze steadily. Because you are the best I have seen, and I know quality when I see it. Because I believe in investing in people who have real talent. And because I think you deserve better than working in Morrison's back corner for pennies on the dollar. I am a woman, Eleanor said, testing him. Your men might not take kindly to having a woman running the leather shop. My men will treat you with respect or find work elsewhere, James said firmly. I run a clean outfit, Miss Webb. No drinking on the ranch, no rough behavior. The men who work for me know I expect them to conduct themselves properly. Eleanor's mind raced through the implications. Leaving town, living on a ranch with 15 cowboys and their boss, even with the promise of respectful behavior, was a risk. But staying in Morrison's corner, watching 60% of her earnings disappear into his pocket while she worked in a space barely large enough to breathe, was a slow death of its own kind. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, James said. Take whatever time you need. But I hope you will say yes, Miss Webb. I think this could be the start of something good for both of us. Eleanor lay awake that night in her boarding house room, staring at the cracked ceiling and weighing her options. Every practical bone in her body told her this was an opportunity she could not afford to pass up. But there was something else, something she was less willing to examine closely. The way James Cordell looked at her made her feel seen in a way she had not experienced before. Not as a novelty or a curiosity, but as a person of value and skill. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. 3 days later, Eleanor gave Morrison her notice. The old man blustered and tried to convince her to stay, even offering to increase her percentage to 45%, but Eleanor had made her decision. She packed her few belongings, said goodbye to the other women at the boarding house, and on a bright Saturday morning in late July, James Cordell arrived with a wagon to collect her and her father's trunk of tools. The ride out to the ranch took about 2 hours, and James used the time to tell her about the operation. He had come up from Texas 5 years earlier with a small herd and big dreams. Through hard work and smart management, he had built the ranch into one of the more successful operations in the territory. He spoke about his cattle with pride, about the good men who worked for him, about his hopes to expand further in the coming years. What about family? Eleanor asked. Do you have people back in Texas? James's expression grew more somber. My parents both passed from fever when I was 19. I have a sister in Dallas, married with children of her own. We write letters a few times a year, but I have not seen her since I left Texas. This ranch is my family now, I suppose. The land, the work, the men who depend on me for their livelihoods. Eleanor understood that kind of solitude. My mother died when I was 12, she said. My father raised me alone until he passed 4 years ago. There is no one else. They looked at each other, and in that moment, Eleanor felt the first real connection forming between them. They were both alone in the world, both building something from nothing, both stronger than they should have to be. The ranch, when they arrived, was more impressive than Eleanor had expected. The main house was a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch. There were 2 bunkhouses, a large barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Everything was well maintained, speaking to careful management and pride in ownership. James drove the wagon to a building set slightly apart from the others, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. The shop was perfect. The building had large windows on the north and east sides, providing excellent natural light. Inside, James had already installed a large workbench, shelving along one wall and hooks for hanging tools and equipment. There was a wood stove for heat in the winter, and the space was clean and empty, waiting for her to make it her own. "What do you think?" James asked, and Eleanor could hear the hope in his voice. "It is perfect," Eleanor said honestly, running her hand along the workbench. "It is more than perfect," James smiled, and the warmth of it seemed to fill the entire room. "Good, I am glad. Now let me show you where you will be staying." He led her to the main house, and Eleanor felt a moment of panic. "I thought I would be staying in one of the bunkhouses, or perhaps—" "I live in the main house alone," James said quickly. "It has 4 bedrooms upstairs. You would have your own room with a lock on the door, and I would ask the ranch cook, Mrs. Chen, to stay in the house as well for propriety's sake. Her husband works as my foreman, and they currently live in a small cabin near the creek, but I am sure she would be willing to move into the house." "Would that be acceptable?" Eleanor nodded, grateful for his consideration of her reputation. A single woman living alone in a house with a single man would cause talk, but with Mrs. Chen as a chaperone, the arrangement could be considered proper. Mrs. Chen turned out to be a practical, no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had immigrated from China 20 years earlier. Her husband, Thomas Chen, was half Chinese and half Irish, a quiet man with sharp eyes who clearly ran the ranch's day-to-day operations with competent efficiency. Mrs. Chen agreed immediately to move into the main house, seeming pleased at the prospect of a larger kitchen and another woman to talk to. Eleanor spent the first week settling into the shop, organizing her tools, taking inventory of what she would need. James provided her with a generous budget for supplies, and she made a list of leather, thread, needles, and various other items she would need to get started. He rode into town with her to purchase everything, and Eleanor found herself enjoying his company more than she had expected. James was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor and a genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. The cowboys on the ranch were initially wary of her, watching from a distance as she worked in the shop. But when Eleanor began producing repaired saddles and tack that exceeded anything they had used before, their wariness turned to appreciation. She learned their names, their quirks, their preferences in how they liked their equipment set up. Young Billy Martinez liked his stirrups a bit shorter than standard. Old Pete Donovan needed extra padding in his saddle because of a bad back. Sam Parker was hell on gear and needed reinforced stitching on everything. Eleanor fell into a rhythm. She woke early, had breakfast with James and Mrs. Chen, then spent her days in the shop. The work was steady but not overwhelming, giving her time to take pride in each piece she completed. In the evenings, she often joined James on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the grasslands while they talked about everything and nothing. It was during one of these evening conversations, about 6 weeks after Eleanor had arrived at the ranch, that things between them began to shift into something neither could ignore. They had been discussing a book James had lent her, a novel by Charles Dickens that Eleanor had devoured in 3 nights. "I never had much time for reading before," Eleanor admitted. "There was always work to be done and lamplight cost money. But I love getting lost in stories, in worlds different from my own." "You should have time for more than just work," James said quietly. "You should have time for the things that make you happy." Eleanor looked at him in the fading light, at the way the sunset painted his face in golds and oranges. "I am happy here," she said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "Happier than I have been in a long time, maybe ever." "I am glad," James said, and his voice had taken on a quality that made Eleanor's heart race. "Eleanor, I need to be honest with you about something." She waited, hardly breathing. "When I offered you this position, it was because I genuinely needed a good leather worker, and your talent was undeniable. But I would be lying if I said that was the only reason. From the moment I walked into Morrison's store and saw you working in that corner, something in me recognized something in you. I have tried to be professional, to keep my feelings to myself, but I am finding it increasingly difficult." Eleanor's mouth had gone dry. "What are you saying, James?" "I am saying that I have feelings for you that go beyond employer and employee, beyond friendship. I am saying that every day I spend with you, I find myself falling a little more in love with the woman you are. Your strength, your talent, your quiet determination, the way you see the world. I am saying that I would like to court you properly, if you would allow it, with the understanding that my intentions are entirely serious." For a moment, Eleanor could not speak. 1,000 thoughts raced through her mind. The practical voice that had kept her alive all these years warned her about the risk, about what it would mean to give her heart to someone who had so much power over her livelihood. But another voice, one she had suppressed for so long, was singing with joy. "I have feelings for you too," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have been trying to tell myself it was foolish, but I cannot help it. When I am with you, I feel like the person I was always meant to be. Like all the hard years were leading me to this place, to you." James reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "Then let us see where this leads. No rush, no pressure, just two people getting to know each other and seeing if what we feel is real and lasting." They courted through the rest of the summer and into the fall, their relationship deepening with each passing day. James was attentive without being possessive, respectful of Eleanor's need for independence while making clear his growing devotion. Eleanor found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing her fears and dreams with someone who listened without judgment. The ranch hands noticed, of course, and to Eleanor's relief, they seemed pleased rather than resentful. Thomas Chen told her one day while picking up a repaired bridle that he had never seen James so happy, that the boss deserved someone who understood hard work and did not expect life to be easy. Mrs. Chen was more direct, telling Eleanor that she would be a fool to let a good man like James slip away. In October, James took Eleanor into Cheyenne for the territorial fair. They walked through the exhibits together, Eleanor marveling at the size of the prize cattle and the skill of the craftsmen displaying their wares. James won her a ribbon at one of the game booths, a silly thing that made them both laugh. They ate dinner at a nice hotel restaurant, and afterward, as they walked back to where James had stabled their horses, he pulled her into a quiet alley and kissed her for the first time. The kiss was everything Eleanor had imagined and more. Tender and passionate, filled with all the emotion they had been building toward for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Eleanor Webb," he said. "I love you with everything I am. I want to build a life with you if you will have me." "I love you too," Eleanor whispered back, and saying the words felt like unlocking something inside her that had been closed for too long. "Yes, James, yes to everything." They married in November in a simple ceremony in Cheyenne, with Thomas and Mrs. Chen standing as witnesses and half the ranch hands crowding into the small church to watch. Eleanor wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her sew, and James wore a new suit that made him look almost uncomfortably formal. But when he saw Eleanor walking down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such pure joy that everyone in the church smiled in response. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and decisions, learning each other's rhythms and needs. But underlying everything was a foundation of respect and affection that made even the difficult moments manageable. Eleanor continued to run the leather shop, and James never suggested she should give it up. Instead, he took pride in her work, showing off her saddles to visiting ranchers and spreading word of her skill throughout the territory. Winter came hard that year, with blizzards that buried the ranch in snow for days at a time. Eleanor and James spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and simply being together. It was during one of these quiet nights in late January that James brought up something that had clearly been on his mind. "Eleanor, I want to give you the leather shop," he said. "Not just to run, but to own outright. I want to sign the building and all the equipment over to you so it is yours legally and completely. You built that business with your own skill and labor. It should be yours." Eleanor stared at him, overwhelmed. "James, that is too much. You paid for the building renovations, for all the equipment, and you have more than repaid that investment with your work," James said firmly. "But this is not about business, Eleanor. This is about wanting you to have something that is yours alone, that no one can take from you. I know what it is like to have nothing, to be dependent on others for everything. I want you to have security, to know that no matter what happens, you have your own skill and your own shop. Will you accept it?" Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. In a world where women had so few rights, where married women's property became their husbands by law, James was offering her something precious beyond measure: independence, security, ownership of her own future. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will accept it. Thank you, James. Thank you for seeing me, for valuing me, for giving me more than I ever dreamed possible." They went into town the next week and had the papers drawn up properly, with a lawyer to make it all legal and binding. The shop and all its contents belonged to Eleanor Webb Cordell, a fact recorded in the county records for all to see. Word spread quickly through Cheyenne, and Eleanor found herself receiving orders from people who had never given her work before, people who respected what James had done and wanted to support a female business owner. Spring brought new life to the ranch. The cattle that had survived the winter were turned out to pasture, and the work of branding and roundup consumed everyone's energy. Eleanor helped where she could, repairing gear that broke during the hard work, making sure the men had sound equipment. She also discovered in April that she was pregnant, a revelation that filled both her and James with nervous excitement. The pregnancy was not easy. Eleanor suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the summer heat made her swollen feet and back ache almost unbearable. But James was attentive and patient, bringing her cool drinks and rubbing her feet in the evenings. Mrs. Chen fed her small, bland meals that she could keep down and told her stories about her own 3 pregnancies to distract her from her discomfort. In late November, almost exactly a year after their wedding, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy after a labor that lasted nearly 20 hours. They named him Thomas James Cordell, after both Thomas Chen and his father. James cried when he held his son for the first time, overcome with emotion at the reality of this tiny person they had created together. Motherhood changed Eleanor in ways she had not expected. She found reserves of patience and gentleness she had not known she possessed, balanced with a fierce protectiveness that sometimes surprised even her. She returned to the leather shop when Thomas was 3 months old, bringing the baby with her and working while he napped in a cradle James had built and set up in the corner. The ranch hands were surprisingly good with the baby, taking turns entertaining him when Eleanor needed both hands for her work. The years flowed by, each bringing its own challenges and joys. In 1879, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter, Martha Ann, who had her mother's dark hair and her father's brown eyes. In 1881, another son arrived, William Chen Cordell, named for Mrs. Chen's late father. The house that had once seemed too large for 2 people now rang with the laughter and chaos of family life. The leather shop continued to thrive. Eleanor's reputation spread throughout Wyoming Territory and beyond. She began taking special orders from as far away as Montana and Colorado, creating custom saddles that were works of art as much as functional equipment. She trained 2 apprentices, one a young woman from Cheyenne whose family had fallen on hard times, and the other a Mexican boy whose talent for leatherwork was evident from his first day. Eleanor remembered what it was like to be alone and desperate, and she paid forward the opportunity James had given her. James's ranch grew as well, eventually running 5,000 head of cattle and employing 30 men. But he never forgot where he had come from, never lost the humility and kindness that had drawn Eleanor to him in the first place. He was a respected member of the community, known for his fairness and integrity. When Wyoming became a state in 1890, James was asked to run for the state legislature, but he declined, saying he was happier as a rancher and family man than he would ever be as a politician. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, James and Eleanor stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land they had worked and loved for 2 decades. Their children were grown now, Thomas training to take over the ranch, Martha studying to become a teacher, and William working alongside his mother in the leather shop, his skill already surpassing most leatherworkers twice his age. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked, pulling Eleanor close against his side. "Leaving town, taking a chance on a cowboy with big dreams and empty pockets?" Eleanor laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "You never had empty pockets, James Cordell, and you know it. But no, I have never regretted it, not for a single moment. You gave me more than a shop. You gave me a life, a family, a future I never could have built alone. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You valued me when the world told you not to. How could I ever regret that?" "I am the one who should be grateful," James said, kissing the top of her head. "You took a risk on me too, Eleanor. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. You built something extraordinary both in that shop and in this family. Everything good in my life traces back to the day I walked into Morrison's store and saw you stitching saddles in that cramped corner. You were magnificent even then, and you have only become more so with time." Eleanor turned in his arms, looking up at the face she had loved for 20 years, now marked with the lines of time and sun but still achingly dear to her. "We built it together, James. That is what made it work. Not you saving me, not me completing you, but 2 people choosing each other every day and working toward something larger than either of us alone." They kissed as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. From inside the house came the sounds of Mrs. Chen preparing dinner and William arguing good-naturedly with his father's foreman about the best way to tool a saddle design. The sounds of family, of home, of a life fully lived. 2 years later, in the spring of 1899, Eleanor and James became grandparents when Thomas and his wife welcomed a baby girl. They named her Eleanor Rose, and when James saw his wife holding their granddaughter for the first time, tears streamed unashamedly down his weathered face. The cycle of life continued, each generation building on the foundation the one before had laid. Eleanor continued to work in the leather shop well into her 60s, only fully retiring when arthritis made it too painful to grip the needles for long periods. By then, William had taken over the business, expanding it beyond saddles to include fine leather goods that were shipped throughout the western states. The shop that James had built for Eleanor all those years ago had become a thriving enterprise, employing a dozen workers and training new generations of leatherworkers. Martha became the principal of the school in Cheyenne, married to a kind lawyer who supported her career and helped raise their 4 children. She never forgot the example her mother had set, showing her that women could work and create and build something of their own. She made sure the girls in her school learned that lesson too, encouraging them to dream beyond the limitations society tried to impose. Thomas ran the ranch with the same integrity his father had shown, treating his workers fairly and managing the land with respect for future generations. He expanded into horse breeding as well as cattle, developing a line of working horses known throughout Wyoming for their intelligence and stamina. He credited his mother with teaching him to pay attention to detail, to value quality over quantity, to understand that real success came from doing things right rather than doing them fast. On a warm summer evening in 1912, Eleanor and James sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard lives lived fully. But their minds remained sharp, and their love for each other had only deepened with time. "Do you remember the day I first came into Morrison's store?" James asked, his hand finding Eleanor's as naturally as breathing. "Of course I do," Eleanor said. "You walked in like you owned the place, asking for the miracle worker who could fix saddles. I thought you were just another cowboy passing through. And I thought you were the most beautiful, most capable woman I had ever seen," James said. "Sitting in that corner like a diamond hidden in a coal bin, worth so much more than anyone around you realized. You always did have a way with words," Eleanor teased, but her eyes were soft with memory and affection. "I meant every one of them," James said seriously. "Eleanor, I want you to know something. Giving you that shop was the best decision I ever made, but not for the reasons you might think. Yes, the business worked out well. Yes, you created something extraordinary. But the real reason it was the best decision was because it brought you into my life permanently. It gave me the excuse to spend time with you, to show you that I was serious, to prove that I saw you for who you really were. That shop was not really a gift to you. It was an investment in my own future happiness, and it paid dividends beyond anything I could have imagined." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, even after all these years still moved by her husband's words. "You gave me more than a shop, James. You gave me belief in myself. You showed me that my work had value, that I had value, that I deserved to be seen and respected and loved. Before you, I was just surviving, just getting through each day. You taught me how to live." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Around them, the ranch settled into evening quiet, the sounds of cattle and horses mingling with the chirping of crickets. Somewhere in the distance, one of their grandchildren was laughing, the sound carrying on the warm breeze. "We did all right, didn't we?" James asked softly. "Yes," Eleanor said, squeezing his hand. "We did more than all right. We built something real and lasting, not just the ranch or the shop, but a family, a legacy, a life filled with love and purpose. We took our pain and our loneliness and we transformed it into something beautiful." "That is no small thing, James. That is everything." They continued to sit as night fell fully, neither needing to speak, simply being together in the way that only people who have shared a lifetime can be. Inside the house, Mrs. Chen was setting the table for dinner, moving a bit slower now but still insisting on maintaining her household. Their children and grandchildren would arrive soon for the weekly family meal, filling the house with noise and warmth, and the rich tapestry of multiple generations coming together. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and James remained devoted to each other and to the life they had built. When James passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1918 at the age of 73, Eleanor held his hand and whispered words of love and gratitude. She grieved deeply, but she did not shatter. James had given her the tools to stand on her own, even as he had shown her the joy of standing together. Eleanor lived for another 8 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent her final years telling stories about the old days, about Wyoming territory before it became a state, about the wild beauty of the frontier, about the cowboy who had walked into a general store and changed her life forever. She spoke of the leather shop with pride, of the saddles she had stitched that were still in use decades later, of the apprentices she had trained who had gone on to build their own successful businesses. When Eleanor passed away in the spring of 1926 at the age of 72, the funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Ranchers and leatherworkers, former apprentices and longtime customers, people whose lives she had touched in ways both large and small. They buried her next to James on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the wind blew free and the grass grew tall. Her gravestone bore a simple inscription chosen by her children. Eleanor Webb Cordell, leatherworker, wife, mother, she stitched together more than saddles. The leather shop continued to operate for another 50 years, passed down through the family and always bearing Eleanor's name above the door. The saddles she had made became collectors' items, prized for their craftsmanship and the story they represented. The ranch remained in the Cordell family as well, adapted over time but still maintaining the values James and Eleanor had instilled. And on quiet summer evenings, when the sun set over the Wyoming grasslands painting the sky in brilliant colors, people swore they could still feel the presence of the cowboy and the leatherworker, still working together, still building something beautiful, still proving that love and respect and opportunity given freely could transform not just individual lives but entire legacies that would echo through generations yet to come. Their story became part of the fabric of Wyoming history, told and retold, a reminder that the American West was built not just by gunfighters and gold miners but by ordinary people who saw potential in each other, who took chances on love and work, and the belief that tomorrow could be better than today. Eleanor, who had started with nothing but calloused hands and stubborn determination, had stitched together a life of extraordinary richness. And James, who had recognized her worth when the world overlooked her, had been rewarded with a love that transcended time and death itself. In the end, it was not the cattle or the leather goods or the acres of land that mattered most. It was the choice they had made to see each other truly, to value each other completely, and to build something together that neither could have created alone. That was the real legacy, the true inheritance they left to their descendants. Not wealth or property, but the example of what two people could accomplish when they chose to love courageously, work honestly, and treat each other with unwavering respect and dignity. The leather shop James had given Eleanor, the opportunity he had offered her in that restaurant all those years ago, had been more than a business proposition. It had been a declaration of faith in her potential, an investment in their shared future, a practical expression of love before the word had even been spoken between them. And Eleanor's acceptance, her willingness to take the risk despite every hard lesson life had taught her, had been its own act of courage and hope. Together, they had proven that the Wild West was not just a place of violence and struggle, though it certainly had both. It was also a place where a woman could claim her own power, where a man could see beyond convention, where love could flourish in unlikely soil and grow strong enough to shelter generations. Their story, stitched together like one of Eleanor's saddles with care and precision and an eye toward lasting quality, became part of the enduring mythology of the American frontier, a testament to the transformative power of recognition, respect, and the simple radical act of seeing another person's worth and choosing to honor it.